Today, I am thrilled to have Michael Ray here with me from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. Michael is a food photographer and has been photographing food professionally for more years than he cares to admit. Most people would consider him an advertising food photographer as opposed to an editorial photographer, but the truth is that Michael's work has appeared in many national food publications as both advertisements and editorial content. Most people that truly understand the food photography industry would say that it's Michael's lighting that separates him from his competition. He has the ability to light food in such a way as to bring out the maximum texture and to accentuate the appetite appeal of the food. Michael is also well known for his many articles about the art and craft of advanced food photography. He also maintains a very informative blog on the subject where he shares behind the scenes photos and videos, image critiques and industry observations. So hi Michael, it is so great to have you here with us today.
Well, it's glad to be here, Nigel. Thank you.
Well, I've the utmost respect for anybody that has the patience to spend the time to light food. It would be long gone before I ever got a chance to put a light on it. If it was me, I would probably eat it first and then think, I probably should have photographed that. So today's topic is all about food photography and how Michael has created a very successful business in this tempting genre. So let's jump right in. And what was that first little spark of inspiration that got you interested in becoming a professional photographer?
Well, I guess my oldest memory of something like that is I was at a trumpet lesson, when I was probably in fourth grade or something, and I was standing outside the local camera store looking at those Canon F1s with all the neat little dials and buttons and stuff, and I was just attracted to that. I don't know why. I think actually in second grade or something like that, I actually did a report on, I think it was a Finding Your Orbit kind of report where you had to pick 3 possible careers, and photography was one of them.
I think given the choice between a trumpet and a camera, I think I probably would have made the same choice.
Yeah, that trumpet thing didn't last very long.
So why food photography specifically? What was it that attracted you to this particular genre?
Well, I noticed when I was in school, I went to the Art Institute, and I noticed that meticulous lighting was something that very much interested me. I still have the shot, and it isn't really bad at all, but it's a picture of a little glass, and there's a strawberry beside it. And I was just fascinated with what you had to do to make it separate from the background and to give it shape. From there, I was just kind of drawn to meticulous lighting. And I think that's sort of the key to the kind of food photography I do. I light it so that you can reach out and touch that, whatever it is. And I think that's why I was drawn to it, is because food photography has a tendency to stay there. You get some time to play with it. And the thing about food photography that I really like, as opposed to, say, just product photography. Usually product photography is like, okay, how many shots can we get done today? And it's really compromise. Whereas food photography, clients will usually give you that time you need to take the shot that you really want to take. It's one of those things where you just don't have to do as many shots a day. It's assumed that it's going to take longer. I think that's why I like it, because there's less compromise and you get it exactly where you want it. And there is compromise, don't get me wrong, but I don't know, I just love food photography.
Would you say that there are business benefits for you specializing in one major niche like this?
I market myself as a food photography specialist, but I also do people photography too. It's a marketing thing. I have like 5 or 6 websites, and 3 of them are geared to sort of 3 different specialties. I have the Michael Ray website, which is a generalist site that I market to Pittsburgh people, and I have Food Portfolio, which is for just food photographers. So I try to market myself nationally with that site and locally with the other site. But while I like doing food photography, if I had to do it all the time, it'd probably drive me crazy. One of the great things about this whole thing about photography in general, commercial photography especially, is you get to do different things, and it makes it really interesting and really a lot of fun. I mean, I've been in operating rooms, I've been in coal mines, I've been in helicopters. I've just done some really, really interesting things. And if I had to sit in a studio and shoot food all the time, I wouldn't have gotten to do those things.
You do a variety of different genres of photography, but you're marketing them separately, each with their own kind of little brand, I suppose.
Right. And quite a few years ago, I got into search engine optimization when I was pretty new, when the internet was pretty new, actually. I mean, I was around for a while, but I was one of the first people I knew to get a web page. And if you would ask me the key to my success, it wouldn't be my skill as a photographer. it would be my interest in marketing. It was just sort of my hobby. And search engine optimization was sort of part of that. So I was really early at getting into search engine optimization. And I like to write too. So I was writing these articles about photography and food photography because I was really getting into that. And what happened was, and it was really a fluke that unfortunately it's fallen off, but for years, if you would go to Google and type in food photography or food photographer, I was number 1 and number 2. Now, that wasn't for Food Photography Pittsburgh. That was for food photography. So what that did for quite a few years is it gave me some amazing opportunities. I mean, there were a lot of people that called me. They gave me a chance from, they weren't local people. They were national companies. They want to try out this Google thing, and I'm going to type it in. And they ended up coming up with me. And, just because I was there, it didn't get me the job, but it got me a shot at the job. And I cashed in on quite a few of those things. And then, success comes around and you get kind of lazy and you sort of forget the search engine optimization and Google changes out from under you. And then all of a sudden, I'm not at number 1 anymore. It's an interesting Google story, search engine optimization story.
What you said back there about the marketing and being good at the SEO, especially in the early days, is quite important because, as most photographers will probably realize if they've been in the business for any length of time, is that it's the best marketer that usually wins. It's not usually what you would call the best photographer in a lot of cases. It's the best marketer, the person who is more accomplished at getting their work out there, getting their website found, getting their blog noticed.
You are so right. I mean, it's so funny. You would go on forums or whatever, and the subject of SEO would come up, and you'd hear somebody, it's not that important, blah, blah, blah. Well, people that have not been number 1 for Google for their key phrases, they don't know any better. I mean, if you are number 1, you get so much opportunity. It just will blow you away. I mean, it's like you're busy all the time. It's easy to foo-foo and say, oh, it's not all that important. But if you've ever been number 1 for your search terms in a market, it's magic.
Oh, yes. It generates quite a lot of visitors for sure. I mean, it not necessarily always targeted, but certainly it creates a lot of buzz about what you do. So one question I have here is, what would you say are the top qualities that you see most in successful food photographers, other than being good at marketing?
What most people don't realize about food photography is there are basically 2 different types of food photography. There's the advertising kind, which I tend to be, and then there's the editorial type. They don't really overlap that much. A few years ago, I sent my portfolio to Bon Appetit, and they sent it back, and they were saying, "Oh, this is really nice, but it's not what we do." And it's just very different. So I can answer your question from an advertising perspective, but editorial food photography is different. And to be honest, I'm not quite sure I understand it. I try to, I think I kind of do, but I see a lot of what I think is just, I look at an editorial shot, and this is kind of how I would differentiate the two, is if you look at a picture, it could be a beautiful picture of food, but it's a beautiful picture of food, and the food is sort of a prop in it. It's like farther away, the background is just as important as the element on the plate. There's great props, and that's kind of what you notice, and that makes for a great editorial food photo. But in advertising, it's just the opposite. I mean, you're trying to sell that piece of pie. So that piece of pie has to look as three-dimensional as humanly possible. And to answer your question, if you're talking about advertising food photographer, it's really the ability to light, because you're usually working to a layout so that your sense of design isn't super important. It's still important, but a lot of times decisions are made as a team. You're working with an art director, and the client is usually at the shoot, and there's a few other people, there's a food stylist, and everybody sort of has their hand in the cauldron there, and they're trying to stir it around, and everybody's trying to do the best thing they can. But it's a team effort. So things like design, they aren't as important for an advertising food photographer where they probably are for an editorial food photographer. I'd say lighting is a big thing, and camera manipulation, which sounds really simple, but I work with a view camera just because it gives me a little more flexibility. And you have to be able to work as a team as an advertising food photographer. That's an important aspect to it.
Of course, you mentioned stylists there. So there's usually somebody there who is making the food look more appetizing, for one thing, I suppose. And also, when it comes to advertising type of photography, I hear that it's important to make sure that what you're you're portraying in the photograph is actually real. Let's take the example of a Big Mac. You can't put something in the Big Mac that you wouldn't find in a real Big Mac. Is that true?
It's true and it's not true. There are certain things that's critical for. Like, for example, if you're doing packaging, you definitely want to keep the proportion correct, and you can't substitute a food. I mean, if you're selling ice cream, it has to be that ice cream. But let's say you're doing a menu shoot for a company. That ice cream sundae might be mashed potatoes or all the things you've ever heard about. So there are rules, there are laws, and you want to keep to the right proportions. Say if you're working for a restaurant, because you don't want to create this beautiful photograph of this heaping plate and then have everybody that comes into the restaurant say, oh, I didn't get that much, or stuff like that. There's those kind of things. But it's not as much of an issue as you would think. I mean, at least it isn't for me as a photographer, because it's really not my responsibility. That's all decided at the food stylist end. I mean, the food stylist actually does more work than the photographer does with advertising food photography. It's if you've never been to a shoot, you wouldn't realize it. I mean, when somebody calls me up for an estimate on, okay, how long is this shoot going to take? I just turn around and I ask the food stylist, how long is this going to take? Because I'm probably waiting for her as much as she's waiting for me. So she's probably as important a part of the team as I am, for sure.
We don't typically think, when we see these images, of all of the preparation time that went into creating, and not just that one little piece of food, but, I bet that, they don't just create one version of a plate or meal or food item. They probably make a whole bunch and then pick the best one, right?
Actually, no, it's sort of...
I'm showing my ignorance now.
Yeah, well, it's a whole different genre of photography. The way of food photography, now editorial photography is different. This, it's different. I know enough about it to know that. But the way a commercial advertising food photography shoot works is you get the background elements and you get a stand-in piece of whatever you're shooting. Okay, and you put it on the plate and you sit there, you take a picture of it, and the camera is on a tripod or a camera stand, and basically you decide what lens you're going to use, you decide what camera height you're going to be, how far away you're going to be. Yesterday, I was taking pictures of hoagies for a local grocery store, okay? So we're photographing a bun. I have a bun sitting on a plate with some chicken wings stuffed in the middle of it just to take up space, to simulate the height of what that bun's going to be like. So we decide on the angle, and then this food stylist, in the meantime, is working on the hero of the shoot. So instead of making a ton of them, she'll buy a lot of them, she'll look through them, and she'll start working on maybe one or two or maybe three items. And one of those is a dummy. She sends that out as soon as she gets it somewhat close, she sends it out so I can actually light something that is actually there. So she doesn't do a whole lot. And it's not like, it's a refinement process. It's not like, okay, go from over here, a couple pictures, over here, a couple pictures, and go up a little higher, go down. It's not the way it works in advertising photography. That camera is stationary. And the reason that's the case is because that food is optimized for that shot. I might take 40 or 50 pictures of that hoagie, but you only want maybe the last 2 or 3, because those are all refinement processes. It's like, oh, look, that onion isn't where it needs to be. The cheese needs to come out a little bit farther. I need to add a little more light to separate the side of that. It's a refinement process. So, and sometimes that bun is being held up in the back by a brick, so if you go a little higher, you see the brick. So it's not like move it around, move it around, move it around. You might make a little bit of change, but it's less than you think.
I wish that you would come and photograph the menu for our local Mexican restaurant, because the photographs that they have on their menus are hideous and enough to put a donkey off. I really wish that they had invested more money and time in illustrating their menu better, because their food is great.
I think Mexican restaurants are really known for their bad photos. But they still sell them,
They do, but I try not to look at the photos. I just open it up, go, yeah, that's what I want, and I close it again, because I don't want to see that before I eat. You've mentioned restaurants, you've mentioned advertising, like it for stores and for so on, but what's your typical ideal client look like?
Somebody with money falling out of their pockets. No.
Oh, okay, yeah.
I really like variety. Probably my 2 main clients are that grocery store chain, and it's a real variety of things that they shoot. One of my best clients clients is a company that's from out of town. They'll come in for maybe 3 or 4 days at a time and we shoot their products, but it's a manufacturer. They sell to restaurants. It's sort of a food service kind of thing. I like to do shots with a lot of environment. A lot of food photography are outline kind of shots. You just put a sandwich down on a piece of white and they cut it out. And it's not as interesting. Everything has to be in focus because they're going to physically Photoshop it out. So there's no romance to it. I really like doing pictures where the background goes soft and fuzzy, and it's like you can spend some time playing with napkins and salt and pepper shakers behind it and dapple some light through there. And I mean, that's the kind of photography I like to do. And this company that I'm talking about, they're out of Buffalo. They come in and we get to do those kind of romantic kind of shots, and those are the kind I really like to do best.
What about people in the photographs? I mean, do you photograph people eating the food as well, or that kind of thing?
Not so much. I mean, I'll have people holding the food, and actually I'm doing a shoot tomorrow where we're setting up 2 scenarios and we're actually going on location. And that's another thing about advertising food photography. It's usually done in the studio. Even if it's restaurant photography, it's usually done in a studio. But I have 3 shoots coming up in the next 4 days where I'm going on location 2 of those days, which is very unusual. But in 2 of those shots, or the shoot tomorrow is 2 scenarios inside this house. One of the scenarios is a party. So there's people in the background, and there might be somebody reaching in, picking up some of the food, but it's all about the different food elements on the plate. So people are just a prop there. But I don't get much into people actually biting into the food. I'm getting more and more hands-on, but it's where these are food photographs with people as props. Whereas I was actually bidding against another guy, and he was a lifestyle photographer. And I'm thinking to myself, this company's making a big mistake because this isn't a lifestyle picture with food props. It's the other way around. But to answer your question, we're doing more and more people stuff.
You mentioned marketing earlier on. We talked a little bit about that. And in fact, you mentioned SEO and your blog and all that kind of thing. But what would you say are the top 3 marketing channels that you use right now to attract the right kind of clients for your food photography business?
The really weird thing about blogging for photography is when you blog for photography, and I don't think a lot of people realize this, when you're a photographer and you blog, you're doing it for sort of 2 reasons. You're doing it to sell to people that might be interested in what you're buying, but at the same time, you're looking for links to your place as SEO bait, sort of. So you have a split allegiance. You're trying to market your blog to photographers or stylists or food bloggers who will never hire you as a photographer, but they will give you the SEO necessary. They'll give you the links that build your SEO so that when you do get that occasional food manufacturer or magazine to see your stuff, then that's what you're doing. So you have to blog to both clients. It's kind of interesting, I think. So I think blogging is really important because that helps your SEO, but SEO is definitely the most important. I think direct email kind of campaigns are very important, but probably the most important, probably second behind SEO is what I call KIT emails. KIT, keep in touch. I have a marketing checklist that I made up, and I try to do what's on the checklist as often as possible. And like at the top of the list is keep in touch emails. I mean, the whole idea is you just want to contact previous clients. And the toughest thing is coming up with an excuse to contact these people. You don't want to do it too often, but you want to say, hey, how's it going? I saw this article. I thought you might be interested in it, and send it to them. Or, hey, I saw your name in the paper, or whatever, if it wasn't a DUI or something. So the idea is you just want to make as many contacts as you can over a long period of time. What happens is they don't have jobs all the time, so they don't think of you, and they have clutter coming in. I'm talking about art directors usually. So they have all this clutter going on, just life in general. So what'll happen is they'll get a job that lands on their desk that would be good for you. And if they haven't heard from you in a while, they might, listen to the clutter and go with the other person or try the other person or whatever. But if they just received an email from you a day ago or whatever, they're more likely to think of you. So I think those keep in touch emails are really very important.
Email marketing is certainly a huge part of my business, and I think it should be a bigger part of more photographers' businesses for sure. Keeping in touch, just as you say, not just marketing to them, but just essentially keeping the relationships alive.
One of the most important things you can do as a photographer is make new pictures that you really like. I mean, if you're a professional, you might go months without creating something you really like. I mean, you might be really, really busy. It's like your bank account is just bulging. indulging, but at the same time, it's really been kind of like mundane, boring work. It's important to have those images. And one of the real reason you want those images is so you can contact people with those. It's an excuse to make another contact. You just want to be at the right place at the right time. It's my last emailer that I sent out, it was these portraits that I took at a pro bono place. You know, it was like, I don't know if you ever heard of Flashes of Hope. It's kids with cancer. You go in and you just take portraits of these kids that have cancer at the hospital and you give them to them as gifts. But I came away with some amazing portraits. They were just beautiful. And, I have my email list divided into people that are just food and then just people stuff. So the whole idea was you just send them out these pictures, say I did a little composite picture where I had 3 images together and they were all from this shoot and said, hey, what do you think of this? It's a style that I've been playing with. What do you think? It's not like heavy duty sales, but it's just like keeping in touch. This is like, I just want them to say, oh, Mike, he's still doing some really cool stuff. I like that. So, the next couple of days when a job lands on his desk, he thinks of me.
What about social media? How much of a part does that play in your marketing?
I really love Facebook. I love it to death. But to me, it's personal. I'll let my client friends into my groups, my contacts or whatever they're called. But I don't want strangers in there. I mean, Facebook to me is personal. And that's okay for what I do. If I was a wedding photographer or a portrait photographer where I was doing retail stuff, then I would probably have to expand that. But for business to business kind of stuff like I do, I don't think it's really necessary. But I like that as personal. I like to keep that personal. Now, I've really been trying to pursue LinkedIn strongly. And as a matter of fact, that's how we got together.
Right, yeah.
So I've been pursuing that, and I've just read some books on it. I've been really researching the whole social media thing very heavily this last couple months. I mean, I've gone through quite a few books preparing for this. I mean, I really wasn't into podcasting at all. So I've been listening to your podcast, and I've become, over the last week, I'm addicted to them.
Thank you.
I listen to them on the way to work. But Twitter, I just don't get Twitter. I'm sorry. I just don't get it. A few years ago, I bought this program called TweetAdder. I had 45,000 followers. The only trouble was I didn't have anything to say, and I didn't care what everybody else said. It was just like, I just don't get Twitter. LinkedIn, I can understand it. Facebook, I like. Instagram, I love Instagram. I don't produce enough cool images for Instagram, but as for inspiration, it's amazing. I just love it.
Yeah, I hear a lot of good things about it.
Instagram is so depressing because it makes me realize that there are a gazillion great photographers out there. It's amazing how many good photographers are here. To me, I tend to follow, like there's this guy named Mustafin or something like that, and he does portraiture, and he's somewhere in the Middle East or somewhere around there, but he has access to these amazing faces. But he's one of those guys that carries his camera everywhere he goes. He has to. And there's all these people I follow that they live along the coastline of, some tropical beach, you know what I mean? And they come away with these beautiful photos, just these landscapes that are just fascinate me. They just are so beautiful. And I just love that kind of stuff for inspiration.
Let's change tack a little bit. And can you give us a quick overview of your typical client booking process? How does somebody end up becoming a client of yours?
Well, it's not like other kinds of photography where there's like some kind of sales funnel. I mean, usually somebody calls me and says, hey, I have this job. Are you interested? If it's a repeat client, that's the way it goes. I have a job. Are you interested? And they'll say, okay, we have 10 shots to do. And my question is, are they outline shots? Are they environmental shots? Do you have a specific shot list? Do you need a food stylist or not? Usually, I work with food stylists probably 95% of the time. So I'll just turn around and give all that information to the food stylist, and she'll turn around and tell me all the things I forgot to ask. And then I'll go back and ask those. And then we'll book it. It's usually a call. And sometimes if there's people that you've never worked with, that's brand new clients, you kind of have to feel them out. You'll run into, especially if you're really good with SEO, you'll run into a lot of people that have not done this before. And that's one of the things that I'm going to be working on for my webpage, is not only to bring in that kind of work, like do search terms for people that are new, restaurateurs that have never done this before. So that's my goal, is to really work on that kind of page, those kind of pages. But if you're really good at SEO, what happens is you get all these people calling you and they've never done this before. So you have to really educate them on the process. And it's a time consuming thing, and you have to worry that when you give them a price, it's usually like 10 times more than they had anticipated paying. So there's sort of that going on. But one of the interesting things, and I think this might have changed with some of the recent changes in Google, but I noticed that the kind of work you got from Google was you didn't get the big advertising agencies in New York, even though you'd get an occasional one of those, because they're more sophisticated. They would be able to, they know where to look for quality food photographers or whatever they're looking for, but you would get less sophisticated buyers. There'd be someone that lives in Podunk, West Virginia that is making this pizza and they want to go national, right? So they would Google it, they would find you, and because they don't have any food photographers in Podunk, West Virginia, so they had to travel somewhere. So they didn't care if they traveled to New York or Pennsylvania or wherever, they had to travel anyways. Like I did some work for a company out of Puerto Rico. It was one of those things where there's no food photographers in Puerto Rico, and they Googled you and they found you and you got that kind of work. There's a lot of that going on. So you'll get a lot of unsophisticated buyers that are very good clients. But that was an interesting thing about Google that most people don't realize about search engine optimization. The really big people that understand an industry, they usually don't find you on there because they know where else to look.
Hey, international opportunities for food photography. You can't argue with that.
No, especially if you get to go on location.
What about competition? Is the food photography space very competitive? We've got new photographers popping up in all kinds of other genres like portraits and weddings and pet photography and kids and so on. But are there a lot of new photographers trying to jump into the ranks of food photography? And how do you deal with that sort of competition if they are?
I have friends that are photographers in other industries. Like I have a good friend that's a photographer that does senior portraits. So I hear him crying and moaning all the time. But it's not as bad for me. Just the industry in general. You could see it happening a long, long time ago. It all kind of happened when, sort of desktop publishing came in. People would, instead of, like there used to be a whole kind of photographer. They would just do newsletter photography, for Alcoa Corporation or whatever. They'd get hired to come in and photograph so-and-so, so-and-so. And they made a living like that, and as technology improved, it took that away. And it continues to erode our base. If you go on Instagram, you'll see a million food photographers, but they're not really competition with the advertising part of it. There are clients that don't know the difference between advertising food photography and editorial food photography. And so I'll lose work to those kind of people. The more sophisticated buyers might try an editorial food photographer for an advertising photography assignment, but after a try or two, they'll realize this wasn't the right deal. But to answer your question, yeah, there's erosion. It's like photography is getting easier and easier to do. But, if lighting is your specialty, which it is mine, technology can't do that. If you can light, you can differentiate yourself. My camera's the same as yours, but if you can't light it like I can, you're not all that much of a competition.
I guess as well that in advertising work, good enough isn't good enough, really, because they want to sell Big Macs and chickens and frozen cakes and ice cream and beer and chips and whatnot. They want the best photographs they can get, I'm assuming, of this stuff. And so within the portrait space, for example, a lot of people, because of the prevalence of Facebook and iPhones and all the rest of it, they've become somewhat used to good enough. The photos they get from their iPhone are they good enough? That's and they expect that sort of same level from a professional photographer sometimes. But I guess in advertising food photography, that's really not such a thing, right?
Well, it's interesting because there's so much of that iPhone photography is the trend is in that direction. So that is sort of eroding what I do. And I'm trying to become more of an editorial look when I want to, but I call it less quality, but a different style is what it is. It's not so much quality as style. It's so subjective. But if the style moves away from me, and it's funny, there's a guy in town, he's older than I am, and he's an excellent photographer. As a matter of fact, the best compliment I ever had in my entire life was when a client said to me, we really want to hire you, but can you drop your price to match his? I knew I had arrived when that happened, because he was like my hero for the longest time. He was just so good. But anyways, I looked at his webpage just recently, and his stuff looks dated to me. I was surprised. He's still chewing up a lot of clients that I'd like to have. He's still very good, but to me, his style looked really dated. And one of the things that you have to be aware of in this business is when styles change out from under you. And I'm afraid of that. I'm trying to fight that. It's like I have a certain look based on the lighting techniques that I use, and sooner or later, it's going to be out of style. And my stuff is going to look kind of the same way his looks to me now. So that's one of the things you have to keep up on is, you don't want to change with the wind, but at the same time, you have to evolve. And one of the evolutionary factors right now is this iPhone kind of photography. Everything needs to be a little bit looser. Everything needs to be a little bit less well lit as I see it, but yet that's the style.
Really, what you're saying is you need to be careful that your photography doesn't get as stale as the food if it's left out too long. You mentioned pricing just now. You said that somebody had said, well, if you can drop your price to match this guy, you're in, as it were. This is one of the areas that a lot of people struggle with, is coming up with prices for their work, and then when they do, they kind of have an internal fit and go, oh gosh, I can't ask that because it seems ridiculous and really high and all that. But of course the kind of work that you do is intense and it's involved and it's not simple and requires a lot of time and probably processing and so on and so forth. So it's not cheap, the type of work that you do, I expect. How can photographers who are new to this type of business get more confident about the types of prices that they need to ask?
At the local ASMP meeting, I am a hated individual because my advice to any photographer just breaking into this industry is you have to charge whatever it takes to be working. In my opinion, if I was breaking in, if the going rate was $1,000, I'd charge $500 just to get the work, because photography is such a difficult industry to break into. I mean, the attrition rate, the Art Institute of Pittsburgh is like, they kick out, 20 photographers a quarter. So the market is saturated, and I love what I do. It is such a great career that I couldn't see being out of it. But the attrition rate for a photographer is amazing. Out of the kids I went to school with, I know 3 that are still in the industry, and it's like, it's a great industry. And if you just charge $500 a day for photography and you don't have a whole lot of overhead, it's terrible for someone like me because it brings it's downward pressure on the market. That's just the way it is. But if I were just starting out, that's exactly what I do. And that's what I tell those young photographers. That's what they should do. I think, if they want to be a photographer, they have to survive these next 2 or 3 years, or they're going to be onto some other industry. And I can guarantee you that whatever they do, it's not going to be as much fun as what we do.
That's certainly interesting, but I worry that kind of approach makes it difficult for them down the road when they want to raise their prices.
No, not at all. The kind of work you're going to get when you're just entering this industry, first of all, there aren't that many food photographers. I mean, to be a food photographer in Pittsburgh, you cannot just shoot food. There's not, unless you go national and you're successful, which is very difficult to do. You can't survive in a market as big as this as a specialist. You have to diversify anyways. And that's one of the other things I say. If you I have someone call me from the Art Institute and say, hey, I want to be a food photographer. They come in, we talk, and I say, first thing you do is you shoot everything you can. Weddings, whatever it is, when you're first starting out, you shoot it. The idea is to make as much money as you can to buy the equipment that you're going to need in this industry. This is really true, I think. I don't think you should come out of school. And, I've listened to some of your blogs, and there's some people that have the exact opposite opinion of what I'm stating right now. But this is my opinion. You come out of school and you should be a generalist. You should take anything there is, and you should do it for any price you can. That's my opinion. And then as you grow, the kind of jobs you're hired for will be different. It's going to be a different market you evolve into. And then once you get a certain competency, then you can decide, it's kind of like I did. It's like I didn't come out of school being a food photographer. And if you would have said to me, are you going to end up as a food photographer? I'd say, no. It's just one of those things that I didn't really realize that what it required was my strengths. I evolved into it. I had the time to realize that I hate to do product photography. Most people think product photography, food photography, it's the same thing. Well, it's not. It's very different. So I've evolved into it something because, I found out that I liked it, and I found out that what it takes is what I do best. So that's kind of it. But I still like the variety, not to put that off. See, I think photographer needs the time to mature and to gain technique. There are so many little tricks to photography in general. It's easier now that it's digital, but it used to be that you would get done with a shoot, you'd go home, everybody go home, the food stylist has to be paid and all the bills have to be paid. And meanwhile, The film is at the lab and nobody knows if it's any good or not. So you had to be good back then. Now you look at the back of the camera, it's okay. But you need to evolve and you need to build your skill sets. You should do that in any way you can. You just have to survive as a photographer long enough to know you're going to be in it. Some people have strengths, some people have weaknesses. Like if you're there's like 5% of the photographers that come out, or maybe less, that they have amazing eyes. Like they can just see design. It just is amazing. They could just shoot a roll of paper towels and it's art. I mean, I don't have that kind of, I have a skill set. That's not it. I guess what I'm trying to say is just stay in the industry. Whatever you can do to stay in the industry, it's just an amazing job. And I would hate to leave it for any reason.
This podcast is great because I get so many different people on here with different perspectives and different views. And that's not to say that anyone's right and someone's wrong. So I think it's great. And I certainly really appreciate your opinions and all that kind of thing. And it's wonderful that you share those. And going back to what you said about trying all different things, in one sense, you won't know what it is that you're really passionate about until you try it and see. And I certainly found that with event photography. I was asked to photograph an event for a local organization here in Memphis, and I said, sure, yeah, I'll do that. I hated it. I could not wait to get out of there and get home. I thought to myself, can't imagine that any other photographer on the planet would enjoy doing this. And yet I've spoken to people since who it's their living. It's what they live and breathe. Oh, I love photographing events is what they'll say to me. And why? It's like being the only sober person at a drunk party. It's no fun.
Well, you know what? I just did an event recently. I try to stay active, like doing pro bono work. And one of the places that I do pro bono work for is a city mission. It's like a homeless shelter kind of thing. And they have a fundraising gala, they call it. And we just had that thing just a couple weeks ago. And I was photographing, and I don't do very much event work at all. But I enjoyed it. It was challenging. I mean, it was really dark, so I had to figure out technically the sync speed versus the flash power versus, it was just really fascinating to me. I mean, if I had to do it every day, it might drive you crazy. But as a variety thing, I'd do it once a month. To me, it was kind of fun. I enjoyed it.
Well, have at it. I'll happily send any recommendations for jobs over to you. So what would you say? I've got to ask this question. What's the hardest food to photograph?
It's funny because there's a food photography critique. It was a group either on LinkedIn or Facebook, and someone just raised that very question. And I was just astounded at the different answers that came up with. And to me, I photographed I think every food there is to photograph many times. And the most difficult thing to me is real ice cream and pizza pulls. Those are the two most difficult things. Pizza pull being, that piece of slice where the cheese kind of stretches out. Those are the most difficult things, without a doubt, to me. But I was amazed at what other people came up with. Like one lady said, beans. I mean, how can a bean be difficult to photograph? I just didn't get it.
I would imagine soup would be pretty difficult for some reason. I don't know why.
I actually did a blog post on soup. So if anybody wants to know how to photograph soup, I have a how-to thing. But it's easy. To me, it's easy.
I love cooking. I love making soup, and I make pizza, and I make all kinds of stuff. But I could never imagine, like you say, that pizza pulling that little slice away and having the stringy cheese all joined up like little wires and things. I just can't imagine.
It's a hit or miss kind of thing. It's all the food stylist. And it's not even the food stylist so much as the cheese. Like if you're shooting a certain pizza and the recipe of that cheese pizza, I mean, if you go to, say, a big name pizza chain, they'll bring their cheese, right? Well, their cheese might not pull very well, and it'll just drive you crazy. I mean, there are certain cheeses that pull better than others,
Get it right already. We've had to eat 15 pizzas before we can get a decent shot.
I have a client in Cincinnati, La Rosa's Pizza, which they're great people. I mean, it's a great place. And they have great pizza. And we'll go in for a shoot. We'll get there at 7:30 in the morning, and there's pizza right there for us to eat. It's one of the best shoots there is.
Fantastic. Pizza is piping hot at 7:30 in the morning. Forget the coffee.
5 different flavors, too.
Oh my gosh. Well, all this talk of food is really making me feel hungry all of a sudden. This has been great, Michael. I'm really glad that we had this opportunity to have you on here. And thank you so much for being so generous with your time and your expertise. It's wonderful. And I think people should go take a look at your website. I'll make sure that there's a link to that in the show notes for the podcast so they can go check out your work and all that kind of thing. Clearly, as you can tell from some of my questions, I knew nothing very much about the food photography industry to begin with. And I know lot more about it now than I did before, so thank you.
I really enjoyed myself, so thank you for the invitation.